All right, where have we been over these last 7 weeks? It is a long and winding road. We're going to recap in about 6 or 7 paragraphs. Are you ready to go? 2,000 years in review. Number one, we began with Christianity as a movement within first century Judaism, a Judaism that was in tension with both Roman occupation and Greek culture. Its founder, though I don't know if he would recognize institutional Christianity today, is Jesus of Nazareth. And certainly Christianity would not have taken the direction it did without Saul of Tarsus, also known, of course, as the Apostle Paul. Christians of the first century were largely a marginalized group, a persecuted group without social standing. Session 2. In the first 3 centuries of Christianity's existence, its leaders, through formal gatherings and lived experience, established the creedal statements of belief and practice that we still hold to today. They completed the very strenuous task of putting together the canon, what is now the New Testament. Constantine and the Roman emperors of the late 4th century co-opted Christianity for political power, and the church at Rome began to emerge as the dominant church in the Western world, often imitating and reflecting Rome's civil power. Number 3, Session 3, when the Roman Empire fell, about 500 AD, European civilization collapsed. The institutional and ideological void was filled by the church at Rome. The Constantinian shift, begun in the 300s, was completed by Charlemagne. Christmas Day, 800 AD, when he was anointed the first king of the Holy Roman Empire. And then Roman Catholicism became the most powerful organization in all of Europe, establishing sacramentalism and eclipsing all other political and theological rivals. Next slide, if you would. Session 4, as Europe entered its darkest age, religious and political revival swept the Arab world as Muhammad founded Islam, 622 AD. Held together by Muhammad's teachings, and an Islamic empire spread throughout the Middle East, into Western Asia, Northern Africa, Portugal, Spain. The Islamic caliphates in direct succession of Muhammad would survive through World War I, when the Ottoman Empire ultimately disintegrated. Session 5. In 1095, just one generation after the Great Schism that divided the church between East and West, the East appealed to the West for military assistance in the Middle East. The Roman Pope took it as an opportunity to seize power, lands, wealth, and to subject the Eastern Church to Roman rule once again. 9 horrific crusades would follow, with European interference, as it was called by the Muslim world, extending into the post-World War II years and the 21st century. And then 6, last time we were together, following the abuses of the Crusades and exposure to a culture with greater advancements than its own, Europe came alive with the Renaissance, the Reformation, movements of cultural and religious renewal, beginning as a critique of papal power, financial corruption. The Reformation, led by Martin Luther, John Calvin, and others, became a distinct movement within Western Christianity. So there, in 1 minute flat, is 2,000 years of Christian history. You're welcome. You didn't have to come all these other weeks. You could have just came for these final few minutes. The movement that we live in today in North America is the aftermath of the Protestant Reformation. But for how much longer do we live in it? That's a question I really want to pick up tonight as we talk about Christianity today and Western Christianity going forward. I am nothing at all if not a radical Protestant. And I can explain that a little bit. The church stands in need of constant reformation. Karl Barth put it like this. He used the phrase semper reformanda, constant, always reforming, saying that the church requires constant reform. So in my view, and it's my view and that's all it is. I think you have Ronnie's requisites back there. There we go. This is the premise that I'm operating with tonight, and philosophically, I've probably operated from this premise for the last 15, 20 years of my theological life. But when you're talking about reform, there are three things that I think we have to hold constant. Number one, reform is a constant return to Jesus of Nazareth. This will always be a challenge for the church. Tip your hat to the church fathers and mothers. Respect Christian theologians and Christian history. But when all the accoutrements can be stripped away, Christianity as a movement is a Jesus of Nazareth movement. And if it's not that, then it has left its founding principles. So let's begin right there. That Reformation, best we can do it, is a constant return to Jesus of Nazareth, the person, His work, His life, His teachings. 2, reform must be contextually aware. Now, what do I mean by that? With apologies to the Restoration movement in particular, and with apologies to my younger self, we can never go back to doing church the way the first church did church. Cannot happen. Because those people were rooted in a particular context. If we all lived in the Middle East, and if we all came from Jewish backgrounds, and we all lived within the occupied Roman Empire, maybe we could do church like the first church did church. My point is that every generation and every church expression, no matter where it's located in the world, has its unique calling and unique opportunity to be the church in the context where it is located. A simple faith in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida is a simple faith in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida. You cannot pick this up and move it somewhere else because the context would be different. Therefore, the expression of church by requirement would have to be different. Does that make sense? So if we homogenize, if we are totalitarian about church has to look like this, and it has to be expressed like this, that's genuinely not reform. That's boilerplating. That's Americanism to think that I've got the formula here so I can mass produce it like widgets and make it work everywhere. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way at all. And 3, reform is by nature adaptation. Structurally, institutionally, and I'll go out on a limb and say theologically, and use a fancy word tonight, epistemologically. Philosophical word that means how do we know what we know? How do we come to the conclusions that we come to? And if we're really going to be in a constant mode of reformation, we have to be willing to make heavy-duty changes structurally and theologically. So speaking as plainly as I can, we have to be true to Jesus, true to our time and place in history, and true to the truth wherever it is we find the truth and wherever it is that the truth leads. That is the spirit of constant reformation. So let's play a game. Yeah.
Number 3, wouldn't that be true individually?
The question is, wouldn't point number 3 be true individually more so than institutionally? Yes. I think it would certainly begin with individuals. And we're going to talk about this some tonight, just as the Reformation ideas. It doesn't stay with individuals. Because what happens is it catches fire. And then that's how institutions change. They change over a long period of time. But every institution reaches a crisis where it's change or die. Or change or regress. Or change or violence. And we'll talk about that very thing tonight. It's a very good question. Well, I don't know if truth changes, but certainly understanding does. And our grasp on the truth today, the truth of the known universe, is far superior to any human species that have come before us. Now, would we say they didn't have the truth? No. They had the truth so far as they could understand it. But they didn't have all, no one has all the truth. Because the truth is constantly unfolding. There is always a learning process involved. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. How he is interpreted culture to culture, though, always changes. It's culturally dependent. Because, I'll give you an example. For someone to say, Jesus is Lord, does that make sense to you? It makes sense to you because you were raised in a Christian environment where you know who Jesus of Nazareth is. And you also know that the word Lord is not just meaning sir, but a position of superiority. You also know in your background, if all you good Lutherans and Methodists and Baptists, that when someone says Jesus is Lord, they are making a theological confession about where they are placing their faith. If you do not have that in your background, the phrase Jesus is Lord is completely incomprehensible to you. It is just the handle on the suitcase to a much bigger story. You see what I'm saying? It works for us because we're all from the same cultural view, mainly. But it doesn't work in every context. Let me play this game with you and it'll get right to where you're talking about. Are you familiar with the ship of Theseus? Do you know this little thought exercise? Anybody? Oh, this is going to be fun. So, Theseus was the ancient king of Athens, and his archenemy stole all the children from Athens and took the children to Crete, Minos or Creos or someone, I forget his name. So the king of Athens gets on his boat and sails to Crete, collects all the children, rescues them, and sails to the island of Delos in the Adriatic or the Aegean Sea. It's 100 miles from Athens. So thereafter, every year to commemorate this rescue, the people of Athens would go down to the harbor, and all these children would get on the boat and sail the boat with adult supervision from Athens to Delos to commemorate the rescue of the children. This went on for decades, centuries. Here became the philosophical question. The boat was so old and repaired so many times that after a couple centuries, there was not an original component of the ship of Theseus left. But it was still called the ship of Theseus. And so the thought exercise is this. Is it really the ship of Theseus, or is it something else? So let's apply this to the church. Having changed over the centuries and replaced components over the years, are we still what Jesus began with, or are we, by necessity, something different? It's a great thought exercise. I'm not saying we're going to solve it, but it's a great thought exercise. That's my conclusion. You were reading my notes, weren't you? My conclusion would be that we are not the same materially or structurally. That church is long gone. But we can be the same in identity and purpose. I'll give you another example. Next slide, if you would. Look here. You're not even yourself. You carry today none of your original parts. They're gone. They're gone. Just think about your skin. Your skin, it seems so real. It replaces itself every month. It's gone. All of your organs, look at them. Whether it takes 20 years or 300 days or 20 days, your cells are in a constant state of regeneration. Now, does that mean that your identity as a person has changed? Now, you've changed over time. I mean, shape, maybe. Hair, no hair. You've grown. Your actual person is transformed from where you are as a child. But more than that, your physical being is no longer what it once was. Yet, your identity is the same. Right? That is the ship of Theseus's. That's the 21st century struggle of the ancient ship of Theseus question. Whereas you can remain true to your identity and yet be radically different and transformed down to DNA elements. The DNA will stay the same, but it's a self-generating, miraculous thing that the human body is, that it continues to rebirth itself within the same identity. So what makes you what makes you who you are is your specific consciousness. Your specific identity that is the spark of God, which is the miracle of being a human being. And as I said a few weeks ago, 99.5% of our DNA material is identical one person to the next. So whatever it is that makes us unique is some sort of spirit within us, to what Doug is saying. If we can maintain the spirit of Christ within the church, it's still the church. Pretty fascinating when you think about it. All right. Western Christendom, let's talk about where it is and what has happened to it. It's taken a while to get here, but Christendom, as we have known it, is in decline. And it has been that way for some time. I'm not talking about Christianity. Two completely different things. Christianity as a faith, Christendom as something else completely different. I've talked about the Constantinian shift for weeks now. I've talked about Christendom for weeks. Here is a good, quick summary of what Christendom is. This is from Stuart Murray. He is a British Anabaptist, one of those radical reformer scholars. He says that these are the basic characteristics of what Christendom is. The adoption of Christianity as the official state religion, the movement of the church from the margins of society to its center, the identification of Christians by birth, think infant baptism, or by nationality, think borders, the fusion of political, civil, military, and religious power, the establishment of an institutional hierarchical system mirroring the state, the construction of ornate church buildings and the cathedral, and the use of force to impose orthodoxy or to expand borders. Those are the major factors of Christendom. And as a cultural system, Christendom has been dying by means of what we would call secularization, largely as the result of the Enlightenment, modernity, to which I'm going to get to in a moment. First, let's look at the numbers. If you could go to the next slide. I don't know if do you have this one on your page? I was trying to conserve printing pages all the way to the end. So let's talk about this one, and if you want to get up and take a picture of it, that's fine. This is from Pew Research, very good research firm, 2021. And if you'll look at it in particular, look at the blues and the grays. The grays are middle of the road, the blues are all minority. And it's the people in Europe, East Asia, that say religion is not very important to them. And so what we have, all of Europe and parts of Asia, Canada, Australia, is in a definite post-Christendom movement. Christians that are affiliated with churches are in the minority in all of the blue countries that you see. So what was once the heart of Christendom has ebbed away over the centuries. The orange colors are where religion is very important. And if you'll notice those, they're particularly in the Middle East, they're all Islamic. They're not Christian. India is Hindu. And then Africa is a mix of Islam, Christianity. What did you call it last week, Doug? You mentioned the phrase for those African religions you've spent so much time. It's paganism, but it's this indigenous mashup of thank you. It's syncretic. It's just taking a whole bunch of things together. And then in South America, that is a combination of Catholicism and Pentecostalism. And as you can see, the United States is about middle of the road. There's a second graphic, if we could go to it. It's hard to see here, but let me tell you what is coming. In 1970, on the left-hand side, in 1970 in the United States, 90% of the population identified as Christian. That was the year I was born. So I was born into a 90% Christian country. In 2020, that number was 60%. And as we project out to 2070, that number will be down to under 40%. And then the other graphic on your right is tracking the nuns, not N-U-N-S, nuns, N-O-N-E-S, no affiliation. The no affiliation group is the largest growing group in the United States. It's currently at about 30%. 30% of the U.S. population has no religious affiliation whatsoever. But no church, no faith, nothing. No God, no faith, no preference. None. 30%, you can't go that far. They just have no affiliation. They may be spiritual but not religious. They may be, I believe in God but I don't go to church. 30% today, by 2070 it will be 50% of the population. So there is, even in our own country, and it's been going on for 300 years. This is nothing new. This slide has been sliding for 300 years. Right. And these projections are speaking exactly to that. I'm not, and I'll tell you why, I'm not necessarily afraid of this trend. Because the name of the session tonight is simply Back to the Future. We're simply going back to Christianity's origins. And that is not a bad thing. Devoid of the power scheme and the 1,000-year power grab that we have had. Yes? Right, the absolute number hasn't, but as percentage of population, it is much, much lower. And all you have to do is, if you're not here on a Sunday morning, just drive around on a Sunday morning and you'll see it. Where in the 1950s, towns were shut down to go to church on Sundays. Right? Do y'all remember those days? That's not the case anymore. The church is not the institution that it once was. Yeah, 18 years is, you're 2/3 of a generation. A generation is essentially 30 years. So, the massive changes that take place culturally. And I've talked about this in the past. Let's not miss this fact. And I'll finish here tonight when I get there. Let's not miss the fact that the United States is going through a multi-generational jump in the early 20th century. We're moving from the boomers to the millennials in one bounce. Because Generation X, my generation, there are too few of us. We are the smallest generation to ever be born into the United States in the last 200 years by percentages. So we those selfish baby boomers, they had children later. And so those that didn't, those that had children young, my generation, we are a tiny sliver of the demographic. So a lot of the tension that you're experiencing and seeing in the United States is a move from grandparent to grandchild. There's no step down. It's massive. You're moving two generations at once. Just look at the demographics. You see it. It's happening at a speed now as boomers are aging and millennials are coming of age. I said to someone, I think it was to Doug this past week, it's very likely that there will be no one of my generation that's even ever elected president. It will skip my generation and move from boomers all the way to millennials. And it's a massive cultural move that's going on at the same time. Let me get to these things real quick. I'm going to dive real deep. Will you listen for about 10 minutes? All right, here we go. So the Enlightenment follows the Protestant Reformation naturally because the Reformation taught people to read. Education is on the boom, and as Europe begins to read, as Europe comes out of the Dark Ages, they have this philosophical and scientific and intellectual revolution. And it has become known by the term modernity. It's a viewpoint of the world, not modern in the sense of contemporary. You all are products, myself included. You are all products of modernity. It's the way that we looked at the world. It is and was, I probably should say was, the belief that the great era and the great age of humanity was coming. That humanity would be liberated by the power of reason and science, and that humanity would progress toward universal freedoms, equality, prosperity, maturity. And so what happened with modernity was this big kickback against church power, Protestant and Catholic, where modernity said, our authority will no longer be the church. Our authority will be reason. Our authority will be science. Our authority will be technology. And this isn't all bad. You need science, you need rationality, you need reason. And we who are Americans cannot overlook that at the time in which American democracy, economics, and American spirituality was developing, it was at the height of the Enlightenment. The Declaration of Independence is an Enlightenment document that all people are created equal. That kind of language is revolutionary. Not because we were Americans, but because our founding fathers were of the Enlightened mentality all the way down to their fingertips. They believed in this great progress. The fatal flaw in that modern view is not the desire and hope of improving human conditions. It's the false belief that the modern view could cure the human condition. So they exchange, belief in faith for a belief in humanism. And how has that worldview held up as we enter the 21st century? And what we find now is that the West has lost faith again. We don't have faith in God, and we have largely given up on faith in each other and any hope of any kind of universal progress. And it is a dangerous place to be in a society that has lost its faith in everything. Are you listening? So we're entering this period now known as post-modernity, post-Christendom, and we don't really have faith in God or religion for reasons that Christian history have shown us, And we don't have a lot of faith in humanity for reasons that history and the 20th and 21st centuries have shown us. And it's a hard place to be. And you could say that this has been happening in our country and in Europe at least since World War I and World War II. Those were the shattering events that brought the modern experiment to its end. So much blood and destruction when we thought we were on the cusp of a new humanity. Let me read to you Clive pointing, and you may have a portion of this. Here is the entire quote. And if you would just listen to this, this is an absolute perfect summary of where modernity ends and whatever next is beginning. While the modern age gave the world advancements beyond its wildest imagination, it also gave the world more than its share of horrifying devastation. 2 world wars, the Nazi genocide, the Soviet Gulag, American-produced nuclear weapons, bioterrorism, and chemical warfare, all of these are products of the modern era. Never before has humankind possessed and harnessed so much scientific and technological power, and never had mankind been so completely destructive. It is without precedent. Hundreds of millions starved to death because of the permanent maldistribution of the available food. 100 million died in the great famines of the century. Perhaps 10 million died in natural disasters, and the 25 million killed by motor vehicles. War killed another 150 million. Government repression, 100 million. The total of 14 million who died in the century's genocides was on this scale comparatively small, but they were the victims of the greatest acts of deliberate murder. For all the extraordinary good that took place within modernity, sadly, it may be best represented by the furnaces of Auschwitz or the mushroom cloud of Hiroshima. The promise of an enlightened utopia did not arrive. We left the world in much worse condition than it was found. In the words of Jean-Francois Lyotard, the 19th and 20th centuries have given us as much terror as we can take. If you go to the next slide, I was just quoting Lyotard. Here's what Lyotard says. Meta-narratives are the big stories we trust to give us meaning. Capitalism, Christianity, communism, American exceptionalism, whatever the big story is. Meta-narratives are the big stories we trust to give us meaning. Our grand narratives have lost all credibility. Unification is finished. Nothing is sacred. The only goal is power. He wrote that in 1985. He died in 1998 and never lived to see the destruction of the World Trade Center. It would have only reinforced his conclusions about where Western society as a whole was going. Is that we are largely, Europe, North America, we are nihilistic. We don't believe in anything but our own stomachs. And how can we get power over those who don't have power? He's a prophet in that. It's not often that I would call a Frenchman a prophet, but there he is. He was a prophet in the sense that he had a real understanding of what was happening in our society and how it affects church, social structures, politics, families, everything. The best example I can give you from the Bible is the Tower of Babel. Do you know that story? Early in the book of Genesis. At that time, everybody speaks the same language. Everybody is unified. What do they decide they're going to do? We're going to build a tower and we're going to charge heaven. Literally, we are going to bring heaven down to earth. We are going to assault the gods. And so they start building this massive tower. God confounds their language and they splinter into all these tribal groups and go off speaking their own languages and doing their own things. Post-modernity, the 21st century, will be tribalism. Don't you see that in the United States of America? Don't you see that all over the world? The big story that has held us together can't hold us together any longer. We don't give it credibility, and so we splinter into all of these rival factions. I find some great consolation in the fact that when it was broken down into this tribalism, that is the exact moment that God spoke into it and called Abraham forward. All the monotheistic faiths come out of the aftermath of Babel. And it is God saying, okay, we're going to be in this tribalism. My tribe looks like this. And it is a tribe that brings healing and redemption, not competition, to the world. So that's just a little bit of the... well, I hope it emerges. I hope it emerges. I hope there are a few members of it in this room. And I'm not cynical. You read all that and you think, well... But I am not cynical at all. I am saying that for the first time in centuries, Christians are going to find their grounding in a similar place that our spiritual ancestors had to once stand. Before power, before Constantine, before empire. The megachurch, the question was, how do the megachurches fit into this? And I will not stop the video. I will let it roll tonight. The megachurch in the United States of America is the equivalent to the Roman Catholic cathedral being built in Europe in the 1500s, and they didn't even know that their future was already over. The Reformation was already afoot, and they continued to build those structures as if they would reign forever. And the megachurches that we see on the North American landscape are the equivalent of that cathedral. And their game is already up, and they don't know it. The Christian society is already in retrograde. And it may not happen next year, and it may not happen in 5 years, but if I live to be an old man, you will see megachurches, buildings go the way of the 1980s shopping malls. And they will be sitting empty or repurposed. Because the millennials and the youngsters, that 2 and 3% who can't answer those questions, they have no interest whatsoever in getting in a big room with 10,000 other Christians. It will not happen. They are culturally of a different species. It might be online. I think it'll be tribal. I think it'll be small groups. It'll be the small church, the little church will make a comeback. A place where in a world where you don't know anything, I at least know these are my people. I hope. I believe in the little church. I believe in the small church. Because I believe that there is more power of community in a group under 200 than a group of 20,000. Not in my lifetime. Not in my lifetime. Because there are elements of it that are still too strong, and I'm going to talk about that here in just a minute. I got a lot to talk about. Braden saw me going over my notes tonight, and he's like, how many pages you got? I said, a lot. He said, I'm going to try to hurry to all of those things. There are some factions, I'll just go ahead and get to it. There are some factions within North American Christianity that are holding on to modernity for all they are worth. Now, in some regards, the megachurch is part of that. But the clearest example of that, socially, permission to speak freely, is Christian nationalism. And they learned it from the fundamentalist. The fundamentalist, at the end of World War I, out of Princeton, good Presbyterians that they were, said, the American family and the American society is going to hell. We got to do something. And they adopted a book called The Fundamentals. That's where all fundamentalists get their name. about how to take back society for God. And in my lifetime, especially as a young man, the face of Christian nationalism, the face of fundamentalism, was Jerry Falwell. He was not Billy Graham so much, no. Billy was more inviting. Jerry Falwell was harder. And I say that, my twin sister is a graduate of Liberty University. And she'll watch this later and say, why did you tell them that? But what happened is this. As the Enlightenment gained ground, and people like Darwin and Spinoza and Einstein and philosophers like Hume and Nietzsche, and then post-World War II theologians, Karl Barth, Paul Tillich, Bultmann, Moltmann, they all started coming forward after World War II and saying, look, the world has changed. We're in trouble here. We agree with you. But we have to reassess what is even going on in the world, and how does the church react to that? We have to make some adjustments. And the fundamentalists said, any adjustment is heresy. Any adjustment is apostasy. We can't make those changes. And so, today, probably Jerry Falwell is gone, but probably the leading face of American fundamentalism today is probably Robert Jeffries, First Baptist Church, Dallas, Texas. Maybe Paula White, who is a Tampa pastor right here. She's a definite Christian nationalist. And then within Christian nationalism, there's an even more extreme movement called the Seven Mountain Movement. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's also known as Christian Dominionism. Doug Wilson, a pastor in Moscow, Idaho, is the leading face of that. And he basically says that there are 7 areas of influence in any society, and it is the Christian calling to take over all 7 of those and to enforce a Christian theocracy on North American soil. Returning to, as he would say, to the original charter of the Massachusetts colony. Again, I won't turn off the video. That approach, they would wish to turn society back to a pre-Enlightenment society. And as clear as I can say it, that is bankrupt, it is violent, it is oppressive, it is antichrist, it is dangerous, it is theocratic, and it is a violation of the free will and intelligence of human beings. Was that clear enough? Christianity, the moment it becomes a thing of force, is over. It has lost all credibility when faith becomes manipulation or power. It's over. Go back to the slide. What are Ronnie's 3 requisites? What's that first one? Reform is a constant return to Jesus of Nazareth. And if that spirit of the sacrificial Christ isn't within a group of people, they have given away the farm. Jesus was completely antithetical against power. At his trial, he said, if I was of this world, would not my people be here fighting for me? But my kingdom is not of this world. And those have to ring in our head as time changes. All right, real quick. Next slide. I've got no concrete evidence of what a post-Christendom, post-modernity world is going to look like, but I have a few educated guesses and some suspicions. Number one, here's what we're going to have to do if we're going to go forward. Number one, you're going to have to accept the discomfort. The society is not coming back to us. It's not. It's out of the bag. It's running. If you're dreaming of the day when we could be, Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and all the sitcoms from the 1950s, it's gone, okay? What you can overcome, you must overcome. What you cannot, you must accept. Let's accept that. And discomfort is just going to be a part of it. No matter, my son's the youngest person in the room. He's soon to be 21 years old. And then right behind him, a decade and a half, Garrett is probably the next youngest in the room. I'm not going anywhere else. I'm just talking about the youngest people in the room. Their lives, they're going to have to live with the discomfort of where things are. It's sticky and it's difficult. Here's N.T. Wright. I believe discomfort is itself one aspect of a contemporary Christian's vocation. As our world goes through the deep pain of the death throes of the Enlightenment, the Christian is not called to stand apart from this pain, but to share it. And I think he's exactly right. We have to accept that things will be difficult. Be the church. And what I mean by that is this. So much of what's taught in seminaries today is what the church should be doing. Right, Tom? What the church should be believing. What's not taught in our seminaries is, what is the church all about? The issue is not so much what we confess or what we do or our tactics. The church has an identity problem. And what are we going to do about that? What is the nature, ecclesiology is the word, what is the nature of what it means to be church in the 21st century? Karl Barth, the church is an alternative community. And it exists, I love this, to contradict the world, but to do so in a way full of promise. That's one of the best lines you will ever read about what the nature of the church is. Alternative community, contradict how the world does it, but do it in a way that's full of hope and full of promise. And then C, we're going to have to do some changing. Here are the steps to change. I'm down to 5 minutes, and I'm going to go quick. Here's how it works. Number one, you have an establishment. Now this works in churches, this works in businesses, this works in governments, this works in full societies. So there's an established way of looking at things. And it's pretty much the majority way of looking at the world, a worldview. That's where it begins, one. Two, anomalies begin to show up in the system. If you ever saw the movie The Matrix, there's an anomaly in the Matrix. Something doesn't fit right. This isn't working for everybody. Something stinks. That begins to create this doubt about what's going on. Third thing, a group of dissenters finally step forward and they say, this isn't right and some changes need to be made. All right, that's that third step. But then the fourth step is danger. Because here's what's going to happen once dissent begins to be levied against the establishment. It's going to go one of three ways. It's going to regress, there will be a revolution, or there will be ruin. And those are the only three things that can happen. You'll fall back to the way it used to be and say the cost of changing things is too much. You'll persevere and things will change, or you'll burn the whole thing to the ground. Now, folks, think about the United States of America for just a minute. These are the kind of moments, and we have lived to see one, whether you wanted to or not, where our options, regardless of what you think might be the best one, are we will regress and fall back. We will find a way forward, or we will kill each other. I've seen this happen not on a national level, but I see this happen in churches all the time. It looks something like this. Some church gets a new young pastor, and he's going to make some changes. And he starts making some changes, or she starts making some changes. God help her if it's a her, because her battle is twofold tough. And at first they're like, well, we'll keep an eye on her, we'll keep an eye on him and see how it goes. And then suddenly there's a group that says, yeah, I like these changes. These are the kind of things that need to happen. This is really good. At that moment, there's danger. The establishment will rise up and squash it, or the dissent will win the day, or the church will split down the middle and nobody's happy. What you're seeing today in the former Soviet Union with Vladimir Putin is absolute regression. Every time you hear the word crackdown, a government had a crackdown, that's regression. That means the dissidents have come forward, but they're not prevailing. The revolution is not coming. This happens in societies. It happens in churches. If the groups that can navigate the danger finally see change, not every group gets through the danger. It's yet to be seen. And then the D, the church is going to have to die, and it's going to die of one of three ways. It's going to die from irrelevance because we gave up. It's going to die from asphyxiation because we just went along and got smothered up by everything else. Or it's going to die to be reborn. But I assure you this, and this is the last thing I'll say. The church as you have known it is already dead. What kind of church will be reborn on the other side? That's the real struggle.
You mean a formal institutional church?
Formal, institutional, sometimes local. I can say this, Keith, that for the last 2007, 15 years? 18 years? 2007, Simple Faith began in 2007. And when 12, 15 of us began around the dining room table in watercolor, we began knowing that the churches that we had been a part of were dead. And we didn't know if this church would be alive in 6 months or 6 weeks, much less 6 years or beyond. But we knew that we have to try something different or we're all going home. That's the only way I know how to put it. We're going to be part of the nuns. No affiliation. And there are a lot of those folks that are nuns that used to be church folks. And the reason they are nuns is because they used to be church folks. And they can't do that anymore. Barbara Brown Taylor is great. She's Episcopalian. So she's as institutional as they come. The best one I know is Rob Bell. Rob Bell. He's a young man that was in Michigan for many years. He's no longer pastoring. And he's contemporary of my age. He has an evangelical background, but he is speaking directly to all of this like no one else that I know. Marcus is no longer with us. He's passed. He scares conservative readers of the Bible to death. I read him. I enjoy his thoughts. I thought he was incredibly provocative, and I thought he was about 2 generations ahead of his time. Marcus Borg is his name. Richard Rohr is marvelous. He's Catholic, and he's a Catholic priest. He's a Franciscan, and his home is in New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he has a number of teachers at his center that they're contemplatives. So they spend most of their energy, in the woods or out in the desert, thinking about Jesus. And what would Jesus do rather than doing what I'm doing right now, which is getting all worked up about all these things. So they're probably worth listening to more than I am. But that's a good question. And I have found that the mystics, the early Christian writers, are more relevant now. Julian of Norwich, Meister Eckhart, some of the church fathers and mothers, what they had to say is wisdom that is so much better than just the next fad book that comes off the assembly line. Last slide. Look here, y'all. I could talk about this for the next 7 weeks, but I'm not. We're ending. But look here. Next season already posted. Put it on your calendar, January 8th, 2025 to February 26th, 2025. Let's pray to God we're all still here and alive. In the beginning, we're going to do a study of the book of Genesis with emphasis given to Genesis 1 through 11. The book of Genesis is 2 books with 2 creation accounts, at least. Anyway, I'm already getting ahead of myself. I'm already excited about talking about that. Thank you for coming and for these weeks. And those that listen online and those that are asking, the audio itself, it's going to take a while because these sessions, yes, Braden, they're very long, and I apologize. We're going to clean up the audio of these, and they'll be packaged for the podcast as well, and they'll go out, and it'll be very easy to share, but that's going to take some time to process and to clean those up, but that'll be coming out sometime this spring as well. Thanks for coming tonight. Y'all are dismissed. Thank you. You're welcome.